It's safe to say we strongly believe in the power of sharing stories, right, Tisha?
Yes. And that's why we chose to have our stories published in actual books.
We did. And yours is actually available to pre-order soon, right?
It is. You'll be able to pre-order WTF Am I Even Doing between November 15th and November 21st. And I can't wait to get this book in people's hands.
I'm so excited for you. And I have 2 books available for sale now, Self-Love Club Volume 2 and Momming Hard.
And I actually own both of your books. I will say that if you or someone you know loves our show or is just looking for that connection we find when we hear another person's story, then any of our books would be a perfect gift during this holiday season.
They really are. Each book is a collection of stories told by women for women on topics ranging from self-love to motherhood to the fact that none of us really have any clue what we are doing.
You will inevitably see something of yourself in each of these stories. So why not check some people off your gifting list right now while supporting your 2 favorite podcast hosts?
For more info on how to order, check out the show notes or head to our website, www.nowwhatpod.com. One more thing before we get into this week's episode, a huge thank you to Nat for being our inaugural Patreon member, as well as a huge thanks to my amazing widow sisters, Anita and Mel from the Widow We Do Now podcast for buying us 5 coffees. Don't forget, you can find out the various ways you can support the show and our drive to upgrade our audio equipment down in the show notes. We hope you enjoy this episode. You're listening to Now What, a podcast where we celebrate the human spirit by sharing stories of strength and resilience.
For those going through hard times or looking to get inspired to change their own life, we're your hosts, Jen and Tisha.
Hi, and welcome back to Now What. I'm Jen.
And I'm Tisha. Thank you so much for joining us once again. We are actually getting ready to wrap up our first season, which has been really long.
Yeah.
I think we'll have this week's episode, and then we'll hear from Chelsea next week, and then Jen and I are going to do a finale the week after that, and then we're going to take a break for the holidays. And this week we're going to be joined by Nikieta, who is in Virginia, and she's agreed to join us today. So hi, Nikieta. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello.
Hi.
Thanks for having me.
We are so excited to have you. I was just telling you before we started recording that I've been following you on Instagram for quite a while, and I think you've been following us. And so we eventually connected. And one of the things I guess that I like, or that drew me to ask you to be on the show, is just your story of helping to empower people who have suffered from childhood trauma. And helping them to kind of find that voice that was taken from them, right?
Yeah.
That's sort of part of your mission. Would you agree?
Definitely.
Yes.
Definitely.
Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So I'm a validation coach. And what that is a lot of times people come to me and they're saying like, oh my gosh, I've, never felt like my experience was valid, or I'm out of touch with my story, or I've never felt like I had a place to even own my emotions. Because a lot of times if someone is experiencing a traumatic childhood, especially at the hands of their caregiver, they're told that their emotions are too much. They're too sensitive. They're too dramatic. Things didn't really happen the way that they think they happened. And so I enter me and I'm telling them like, no, that did happen. Like, you're not crazy. And it's actually normal for you to feel sad. It's normal for you to feel mad, and that's okay. And it's a really empowering experience for people to have a space where they can learn to own their voice. In a lot of ways, it's like we talk, of course we learn how to talk, but to find the empowerment, the power that is in your voice and being certain of what you say. So I help people with that. And that is because I grew up with a narcissistic mom, and narcissistic people in general, they're very good at gaslighting. So making you think that things that you've experienced didn't really happen that way, or that you shouldn't feel the way that you feel. And I was always put down. I always came across like a burden to my mom. I would say, hey, mommy. And she would say, what, Nikieta? Like, that was always the tone. What? So I learned not to need anything, not to want anything, to take care of myself as much as possible. And we're in a society where people really do there's kind of like this mother worship where mothers are saints. They can do everything, and a mommy's kiss makes it all better. And, this is just the figure of mom that you see everywhere. And even going to school, I had a lot of friends who would say, my mom is my best friend. And I would just kind of shrink because I'm like, I'm terrified of my mom.
Like, yeah, no, that's not my experience.
Yeah. And it just feels so isolating.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've learned through sharing my experience is that there are thousands of us, probably millions, but so far I've come across thousands, and it's just been really validating for my inner child. So that's like my goal and my origin kind of in one.
Yes. And I like kind of the point you were touching on just about that whole mother worship, because there really is this idea, people are always like, if someone says something negative about their mother, the response is always like, well, that's your mom. That's your mom, like family first. And the reality is that that's not really everyone's experience.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's you, if you're one of those people who have that not positive relationship with your mother, it's hard to exist in a society where mothers are just worshipped, and you're kind of told to be nice and keep those kinds of comments to yourself, that it's like so disrespectful to say anything negative about your mother because she just should be worshipped, right?
Yeah, definitely.
It's like this, I'm just sitting here listening, and it's like this double-edged sword, because it's, in your experience, it's isolating, and it's almost like you had a not good experience, relationship, not experience, with your mom. And then on the flip side, though, it puts an impossible amount of pressure on mothers. So even if you're not, narcissistic or just problematic overall,
right,
it's a lot of pressure to fulfill or to live up to that if you're a mom who loves your children and your family,
and who's actually trying to live up to that. Because it's
like, who is it serving?
Right. Yeah, it's hard now being on the other end and being a mom. The pressure is like, oh, so intense. And I actually got a message in my inbox today that made me a little sad. It was a mom, and she was like, hey, this is me, but I'm the mom you're talking about. So as I see that, I'm like trying to brace myself, like, what is this about? But then she goes on and she's like, I have a daughter, and she tells me the way that she is because I am so terrible. And so I went in the bathroom and cried, and I have 4 kids, but my relationship is only this way with her. And what can I do? And so I was like, the fact that you care so much and that you actually cried means you are so different from the mom that I'm talking about in my content. And I just reassured her, like, give yourself some grace. Parenting is hard and every child is different. And so I came in contact with that today, and it just made me sad, because I'm like, yeah, we can all work on things. I suggested, if she could afford it, go to some therapy to get a mediator so they could hear each other. But it's hard.
Yeah.
But I think that the idea, and maybe you can help us clarify a bit, because I think the word narcissist can be thrown around a lot without really understanding what it means. But my sort of, the way I kind of gather is that a true narcissist is not going to admit wrongdoing, is not going to reach out to somebody and admit that they're that mom.
Yeah, definitely not. Definitely not. I think that's the biggest telltale sign. And even when I was in therapy, years ago, and was afraid of becoming my mom, my therapist would tell me the fact that you are concerned about that already means that you are not like her. I'm like, oh, okay. That makes me feel better, because I think that's the fear, right? Especially if you come from a dysfunctional family and you want to have a family that's functional. Right. There's so much pressure, and that's the fear that you're going to end up replicating what you saw growing up. And it's hard when you haven't had that model to guide you in terms of what you should be doing. It's more like you get the what I should not be doing model, and then you're just trying to like figure that out and just not make those mistakes, because I've been there. And
it's a lot of pressure. And I do think that when you haven't had that role modeling, the pressure is felt in a different way when you become a parent.
Yeah, there's pressure. And then I think combined with a bit of fear and maybe desperation, because you love your child or your children so much and you so want to do right by them and you love them with a healthy love, right? Not the kind of love that you received. But then there's like this fear because you don't know where you're going. Like you said, I know where I'm not going, but there's so many other directions that I could be, and which one is the best one? And, again, there's that desperation that I think comes from the hurt and the trauma. Like you just so desperately do not want to make your child feel the way that you felt. And it can just feel like, because kids they can really throw you for a loop sometimes.
All the time. Time.
I feel like that's a gross understatement. But yeah, it's just hard to know.
Definitely. You gave us the short version of your origin and why you do what you do. Would you be comfortable sharing, when did you get to a point where you were like, because it sounds like your work probably serves you as much as it serves the people you work with. When did you get to a point where you were like, this is what I need to be doing with my life? Like, I need to help other people who have been through what I've been through. So was there like a light bulb moment?
I feel like it came in stages. And I think that's the way life and the universe or God, whatever your belief system is, it kind of works that way sometimes. Like, I'm just going to give you as much as you can handle right now. And then I'm going to expose what's really going on as you take more and more steps. And so I got diagnosed with anxiety and depression back in 2014, just like 2 weeks before my wedding. So that was fun.
Wow.
I know. I was like, on one hand, I was glad to have answers, but then on the other hand, I was like, what the heck does this mean?
Yeah.
And then in 2015, diagnosed with ADHD, but right off the bat, I was like, okay, if I'm going to have these diagnoses, anyway,
yeah,
multiple, thank you. Then I don't want it to be in vain. I don't want my struggle to be in vain. Like, let it be so that I can help people. Like, I want to be victorious in this. Like, I don't want it to take me out. I want to be able to help people. I don't know why. Just ever since I was young, I just felt like I had a big purpose. Not exactly sure what it was, but I just always felt like there's more for me. There's more for me. I'm supposed to be doing more, helping more. And so even when I had really, really low days, I felt like, okay, me being able to help people is just not giving up today, like not deciding to end it all. I'm going to live another day. I'm going to keep going, and that's going to be glorifying. So that was that early on. And I was just kind of riding that wave, thinking I was just going to help the people that I come in contact with in my day-to-day life. Then 2018, is that when I had my baby? So 2018 or 2019, I decided I'm going to write a book. I felt like I had done a good amount of healing in those like 5-6 years. I'm like, you know what? I've learned some stuff. I don't hate my life anymore. I actually kind of like my life. I want to tell people how I got here. So I decided to write a book. Then I realized, well, you can write a book. No one's going to buy it because no one knows I exist. So how do I grow an Instagram community? And so I had to get clear about what my message even was. Like, what do I want to say? What is my purpose? And I'm like, you know what? I want people to know that they are not alone in their struggle. They're not alone in their struggle. And that's where I started. And the more I started posting in that realm, I noticed that I got the biggest response from people when I would post things about my mom. I was like, there's something here. And so I would like post more and more kind of about that experience, and more people were like flocking and hitting me up in my messages and commenting. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I thought that I was the only one. Like I even say in my book at one point, I felt like the unluckiest of little girls in the whole world. And just realizing there's so many of us. And so there have been stages, but it's just even been in the last couple of months where I've realized that the childhood trauma space. Because initially I thought it was like, oh, let's talk about anxiety and depression. But then when I talked about kind of the root of that with my mom, that's just when it just went crazy. And
That resonated with people.
Yeah. People were coming out of the woodworks. Like, that's me. That's me. No one's talking about this. Thank you so much for speaking up. That's so brave. Like all of this. And I'm like, okay, I think I found my people.
And because nobody's talking about it, that leads people to feeling alone.
Definitely.
And it's uncomfortable. Like, at work, are you going to be in like the staff room or whatever, talking about your childhood trauma? Like it makes people uncomfortable. So people kind of hide that part of themselves when in reality, the unfortunate thing is that there are so many children and so many adults who have grown up with trauma in dysfunctional homes or with narcissistic mothers. I mean, it's more common, I think, than we realize because people don't talk about it.
Well, and I think it goes back to something that I've said multiple times, is that like as a society, we're very trauma illiterate. We don't understand that like trauma is a personal thing. So just because you could have grown up in the same home with a sibling, I don't know if you have a sibling or not, and you could come out of it traumatized and they could not. So, and then also just the idea that if you have lived through trauma or experienced trauma, that it does need to be healed from, or it just stays with you. Well, so why would you need to talk about childhood trauma? You're an adult, you're functioning, you have a job, like you have a family, your life looks perfect. Like who cares what happened to you as a kid? Without recognizing that,
and I think
still impacts you.
I think the other thing is that there's a lot of stigma around growing up in a dysfunctional family. Like there's a lot of judgments that people make about that. And I think that's the other reason that people don't talk about it. People don't want to admit that they have childhood trauma because people think, well, if you have childhood trauma, then you're messed up and you can't be a functioning adult. When in fact you can have childhood trauma and be a functioning adult. And a lot of people, I think, don't realize that. In part because the functioning adults with childhood trauma aren't talking about it.
Like,
keeps going around.
It keeps going around because, you might be surrounded by functioning adults who have childhood trauma who just aren't telling you that.
Definitely.
But it leads you to think that the functioning adults, I don't know. I'm going somewhere with that. It makes sense in my head.
Around and around, it's because cyclical. That is how it goes. Yeah.
And nobody's talking about it. And then, I'm in my head as you're talking about when you said that you felt like the unluckiest little girl, I was also thinking back a little bit to what, like the little bit that you mentioned about what life was like growing up and the gaslighting and being sent that message that your feelings don't matter, that the things that happened to you didn't happen the way that you remember. So why are you going to share that with anybody? Right? Like if the message you're being sent is like, you're making a big deal out of nothing. Why would you share that?
And then especially because whenever you do venture to share even a little bit, the common response is that, well, that's your mom. Well, she's just trying her best. Moms have it hard. You only get one mom. So it just makes you feel like maybe I'm not looking at this right. Maybe I should try to see things from her perspective just a little more. So,
When in reality, she wasn't really very nice. Is that? I mean, I didn't live there, but just when a child is made to feel like they're a burden, that's tough.
And even as you were talking about, like the emotions not being validated, I had a flashback. I'm like, there were multiple occasions when my mom would laugh at me when I was crying as like a 7-year-old. She would laugh. And then my sister's 4 years younger, she was 3. And so, 3-year-olds, they're just kind of going with the flow. And then she would like coerce my sister, and they're like chanting "crybaby" at me, like as I'm crying and upset about something. And I'm like, now as an adult, like, who does that? That is so messed up. At the time, I just felt like infuriated because I'm like, you're not listening to me. And then of course, eventually there's embarrassment. But yeah, as an adult and now also a parent,
You
who
look
does
back
that?
and you're like, yeah, that wasn't right.
Yeah.
And when you're a child and those things are happening, you only know what you know. You only know what you experience. So
Right.
maybe it doesn't feel right, but that doesn't mean that you really grasp that it really isn't right.
Right.
Well, and what you can do about it, even
Which is nothing.
nothing.
What can you do about it?
Yeah, you only have one mom. What are you supposed to do?
And I know
it takes
I've
a whole
read,
different. The phrase takes a whole different tone when looked at it
Yeah.
from that perspective.
so you write about both of your parents and sort of that your relationship with your dad was good, but that he was not around a lot
Right.
because of work.
Right. He was in the Navy.
So I just wondered, like, was your mother different when he was around or not?
So I thought that she wasn't, right? Until my mom passed away. And it's kind of like when she died, this curse was broken. Like she had us all under this curse of silence. And when she died, we all started talking and realizing like, hey, this stuff doesn't add up. And so come to find out, my dad did not know a lot of things. He was like, what? He knew that she could be harsh sometimes or intense, but I think especially, in the 90s, that's not super uncommon.
Well, and when you're on your own and your partner is away a lot for work.
So on edge and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I think he knew something because I would always wonder why he wouldn't stand up for us. Like, why would he not protect us? And I found out when I was an adult, he said he knew enough to know that if he got between us, that she would treat us worse when he was gone. So, but I guess, so he knew enough to know that, but he apparently did not know the extent of the things that my sister and I would share with him. And so, which led me to believe that she was a bit different. And then of course we were pretty much sworn to secrecy and silence. So we didn't share any different with him. So yeah, I think he was largely unaware.
But you still have a relationship with him.
Yeah, I do. He's great.
Yeah. And you're smiling when you say that, which people can't see, but
Did you still have a relationship with your mom when she passed, or did you get to a point where you had to sever that relationship for your own well-being?
I never made it to no contact. So I was 26 when she died. I wonder if she lived longer, if I would have gotten strong enough to go no contact. I didn't know. I think I've even found out about narcissism after either when she was very, very sick or after she died. So I didn't know kind of how to deal with narcissists and all of that, but I had started reaching out less and responding less, especially because as she got sick, in true narcissist fashion, she then used that as her leverage. And then you could never tell what was real and what wasn't real. And so I would only go home because they were in South Carolina. I would only go home when my dad or my sister would say, hey, it's really bad. But I would never listen to her. And I didn't want to hear the drama. So I talked to her less, but I still was very susceptible to emotional manipulation. I think because I still wanted to be good to her. I hadn't grasped yet that there was really no benefit in that, not for her, not for me, and that the best thing that I could do was to separate myself. Right. I hadn't developed that much yet.
Because dealing with narcissists is tricky.
Very.
Yes. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yes. So I'm not as fluent at as eloquent when it comes to talking about it as some like Lisa Romano or Dr. Ramani. But what I will say is what it boils down to with a narcissist, if you can manage it, going no contact is the best. And that is because you cannot beat a narcissist at their game. They are very crafty. They are very witty. They are very good with wordplay and subtleties. And I said it in a YouTube video recently that if you do get good at playing the narcissist game, they will burn the board. Yeah. Or they will just completely change the rules. Like, new game. And so they don't go with logic, really. And so it's just in your best interest to go no contact if you can. And if you can't, if like financially you're obligated to stay with them, you cannot become independent, because there are a lot of people with narcissistic significant others and they're kind of trapped in these relationships because they're so financially bound. What would I say? I would say, just distance yourself as much as you can, make interactions as short as possible. And it's unfortunate because that will make some narcissists belligerent because they sense that they are losing control. So they will go to extreme measures to try to draw you out, which is why like at all costs, try to get out. No, because then the other alternative is that you just always do what they say. And you completely lose yourself. You lose your self-esteem. You lose your self-worth. You lose your dignity. And you may pacify them, but only until the next time they have a request. And they just get more and more ridiculous. So.
Right. Because the requests are not always reasonable.
Right. And then sometimes they will use you to facilitate their abuse of others. So then now you're lying to people or withholding things from people, or, it can just get really, really messy and really toxic.
Did your mother ever play you and your sister sort of against each other in that way?
Fortunately, she never pitted us against each other in terms of making us hate each other right out. The most blatant thing I can think of, she did use us against each other. So when I went off to college, my sister and I are 4 years apart. So my first year in college was her first year in high school. And so I would need money. I'm out of state. I need help. I wouldn't ask for a lot because I was used to not having a lot, but I just need some. And she would say, no, I can't give it to you. Your sister's in high school and she needs this and she needs that. And she's in art club and, whatever. I found out years later that she was not giving my sister money. She would tell my sister, no, your sister's in college and she needs money. She needs, for this and that and whatever. So it's like she would use us kind of to get out of serving the other. But fortunately, she never turned us against each other.
Right. So you have a good relationship with your sister as well.
I do.
Yeah. Does she kind of share your beliefs and opinion about your mom?
Yeah. She does. She's actually the one who sent me the link first about narcissism and was like, hey, this sounds like mom. But we just experienced it very differently and dealt with it very differently. So my MO was always get away. My goal was one day I want to be rich enough that I can send my mom checks for Christmas that are large enough that I don't have to see her. Like, I just never want to see her again. But my sister really always fought for her affection and her approval. And I think I did in some ways. I think I just wanted her to stop calling me a screw up. Like, I never expected her to fawn over me or anything like that. But I just wanted her to see oh, you're worth it. You're worth having around. You're not such a burden. But my sister really was going after that.
She wanted that approval.
The approval and the love and the mommy daughter BFF situation. So whereas I was like, girl, it ain't gonna happen. Move on.
I just want some peace.
It
Right.
does go back a little bit to what Jen was saying, just in terms of like two people living in the same house. And that's why I asked about your sister. Like two people living in the same house can have different experiences and different responses to the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the things that, you know, Jen and I think throughout making the podcast and meeting people and talking to people such as yourself, that we've kind of been trying to show our audience is that people have different responses to trauma, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And there's not one more valid response
Right.
or experience than another. I think that's the big thing too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that those responses can all be valid, and people, you know, cope in different ways.
Yeah.
And I can definitely see how when you're dealing with a narcissist who's making you feel like, you know, you're unlovable, or that you're a burden, that you feel that need, like your sister, to prove herself, to try to, and even yourself, you said you kind of wanted to just like prove that you were worthy in some way, but maybe more realistic in the she's never going to fawn over me.
Right.
But
yeah.
Can I ask, when do you think that you started really figuring out that perhaps your mother was different from your friends' mothers or whatever?
Oh, I knew as early as middle school, like being a preteen. And I know because it manifested as jealousy and like anger when I would hear them talking about, oh, I tell my mom everything. And we were talking about this and that, or me and my mom, we're going to go have a nail day. And I would just kind of feel like, oh, well, that sounds really nice. Must be nice for you. Or when like moms would show up to do things with school. And my mom, she did a couple of things. She chaperoned a couple of things, but then she would always yell at me or pull me aside and berate me and like criticize the way I interacted with my friends. And so it just got to the point, I was like, no, I don't want you to come.
No,
So-
actually, I don't want you near the school.
Yeah, it's
Right,
better
please
if you
no.
don't. Yeah.
So yeah, I remember as early as middle school.
But I'm gonna guess, just I don't know, knowing myself as a middle schooler, that's probably not when your journey of like sort of unpacking your trauma began.
No. When did I start trying to unpack? Honestly, I don't think I started trying to unpack probably until about 2015 in therapy. And so this is a whole other topic I'm going to introduce. But when I was 18 in college, I got connected with a church, a campus ministry. And woo, man, the way a lot of churches, you know, will try to preach you out of your feelings and your experiences is very damaging as well. And so it's a lot of, instead of processing, you should just forgive. You need to forgive. You need to have charitable thinking. You need to be selfless. If you want to mend that relationship, you should just serve her more, serve your mom more. And so that was like a lot of repression. And then even at one point I would ask, like, I think I'm depressed. Do you think I'm depressed? And my campus ministry leader was in the medical field, and her response to me was, well, you know, sin causes depression. So I'm like,
Oh my gosh.
oh, yeah.
Right. It must be my
okay.
sins.
So for years, literally, because I was just so, especially coming from such a dysfunctional place, you come into an environment that is, they're like trained in love bombing you. So I'm like, well, this is my family. So I think they must have my best interest in heart. And I know nothing. Clearly, my family is far from godly. So these people must know everything. And so I spent years bouncing from study to study. Like, well, maybe if I study joy, maybe if I study faith, maybe I'm just not grateful enough. Grateful people are happy. Study out gratitude. Oh, maybe it is my sin. Let me dig deep and find every possible sin and flaw I have with myself. And if I get rid of that, then maybe I'll be happy. So no unpacking happened then. And so probably just lots of stuffing
No,
and deflecting.
that's more like stuffing it down, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And sprinkling some more shame on top. So
Well, can we just talk about how damaging it is, this idea that like the goal in life is to be happy? No one's
Yeah.
happy all the time.
right.
It's impossible.
That's a very good point.
And
Yes.
like truly, like it's not possible. And you're gonna have days and maybe longer that you don't feel so great.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's one thing that I talk about when people are like, they'll come in my DMs and it seems like they're wanting a quick fix. Like, well, how did you get better? What do I need to do? What are the steps? And I'm like, whoa, well, first,
It's not going to
depends on
happen overnight.
Where are you coming from?
Yeah.
And then second of all, it's taken me 7 years to get here. And while I love my life, newsflash, I'm not done.
Yeah.
Like there's still so much more to do. So
Yeah.
everybody wants that like quick fix, but it's so multifaceted and so layered.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think anytime you're dealing with trauma and the way that it impacts you, but especially I think when it's childhood trauma, there are so many layers to it. And to
Yeah.
understanding the ways that childhood trauma so long ago is impacting your life today, there's a lot of work in that, right? And just understanding that. And, you know, we talked about it before, but just even going back to that idea of, for a lot of your childhood, you were being told that you were being unreasonable.
Yes.
So you kind of, I think people then start denying almost to themselves what their experiences were.
Definitely. Oh, that's so true.
And there's also a lot of, I think, you know, we look at trauma and the way that it's sort of portrayed in the media or the newspaper, and there's these really like big things that we're like, oh yeah, that's a traumatic event, and nobody's going to argue with someone that that is a traumatic event. And so when your experience is like a lot of little things over years and years, and it wasn't that, like, I think we talked about this on another podcast, but like as a child, or you can look at your childhood trauma and be like, well, you know, no one kept me locked in a room. I wasn't locked in a box. I wasn't starved. Then you think, oh, well, my trauma wasn't that bad compared to these stories that you hear and see in the media, which really, I think, leads people to deny to themselves that their childhoods were shitty. Pardon my language. We swear sometimes, but like sometimes not everyone's childhood was magical.
Yeah.
I think again, there's danger in thinking that the average person had a magical childhood.
Right. But
that's what's publicized and put out
there.
It is.
Well, and I think there's pressure on parents, and maybe less so now, but even like when I was growing up, I mean, appearances really mattered to my parents, and like what.
I mean, I think they still
do.
You have Pinterest parents and Instagram parents. Like, oh my gosh.
But I think, you know, for all intents and purposes, from the outside, my childhood would look like it was magical.
Mm-hmm.
But we had all, you know, and not in any way. I mean, again, this goes against the idea that we should be comparing experiences anyway, but like,
but you guys had your stuff too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, did we, you know, have a lovely home and go to private school and go on vacations and all of those things that, you know, we had 2 boys and 2 girls and like the dogs and, you know, everything you should have in a suburban Massachusetts home. But it wasn't perfect and it wasn't magic. And so like, I guess, along with the idea that like the goal in life is to be happy all the time, like most people haven't had a magical childhood.
And that's one thing that I'm learning, being married to my husband, who has a very, they're a very tight family, right? And so coming from my family, very disjointed, I was not connected even to my extended family because my mother kept me away from them, I think as punishment to them. So I grew up without a family. So I see my husband's family and they get together for holidays and birthdays and things like that. So I'm like, okay, cool. I'm marrying into like a real family. But then, of course, as you stick around longer and you learn more and you see more, and I get like frustrated with certain events or things like that. And I'm like, I said to my husband, like, I guess I just don't get a family, or I guess I just don't get a mom or whatever. And he was like, I mean, you do. It's just not perfect. And so I've been really coming to the realization that, like, because I had a dysfunctional family. My only real idea of what family was from TV and the movies.
Yeah.
And of course,
totally.
you know that that's not real. And I was like, I would never think that real life is supposed to be like the movies. But I'm realizing that that's what I did with my idea of family. Like that must be out there, and that is the goal. And so even you saying that you had like the 2 boys and 2 girls and the dog and the this and the that, but it still wasn't perfect. I was like, there it is again. Like, oh, families aren't perfect. It's not possible for families to be perfect.
No, because no person is perfect.
Right.
I recently co-authored I wrote a chapter in a book, and that is one of the things that I touched upon, is that same idea that like I grew up, like I knew the TV mom wasn't real, but I kind of thought that that's what I was supposed to be achieving because I didn't really know differently. Like you know, but you don't, like, you know, it's not real, but it's just become so ingrained in us, right?
Yeah, definitely.
What we see in the media.
And even if, like, again, if you're coming from a dysfunctional situation and you go to a friend's house that, you know, they appear to, you're getting everyone at their best for the most part, right?
Because there's guests there. Yes, they're not showing you the real side of them. And I remember,
so it kind of reinforces
that. Married, somebody said to me, you know, everybody in a family has their script that they've been reading, and they have their role that they play in their family. And when you're marrying into a family, like, you have to remember that all of those people still have their scripts that they're following. And they're expecting, like, you can't just like go in and change their script, which is kind of like, right?
I wish I had gotten that advice.
And I think it was really probably some of the best marriage advice I've been given, is like to understand that like your husband's family all have their roles that they've been playing long before you were there.
Wow.
And it can be hard to like
fit yourself
see that, because you're an outsider and you can see all of those dynamics functioning in a different way than the people who are in it reading those scripts. Right?
Yeah.
And it sounds a little bit like, as you were listening or as you were talking about your husband's family, I'm like, oh yeah, because they've got their scripts. Like, that was in my head while you're talking. Like, yeah. And then you see it and you're like, wait a minute, but this isn't what is sort of portrayed and put out there. But that is the reality. Every family has their scripts and their dynamics. But I don't want that point to take away from the fact that your experience sounds like it was more abusive, right? Like, yes, that's a script too, and every family has a script, but not every family is abusive.
Yes.
Does that make sense? Like, I didn't want it to be like,
totally.
well, you know, your family had their scripts. That is not what I'm saying.
No, it didn't come from that. It definitely sounded like you were responding to my story about, you know, my husband's family and things like that. So I don't think that you're minimizing it.
Because people do that, especially, I think, like you were saying with the comments about, well, that was your mom and she was trying her best, and like, you know, try to understand where she was coming from. You're like, yeah, but actually she really wasn't that great.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like, people who really, really buy into that narrative, I've just resolved myself to thinking like they are really, really fortunate to not be able to grasp where I am coming from. Like, they have a very privileged life that they have no idea my experience. They can't even imagine. for the most part, my Instagram account is very safe. I get very supportive comments, but of course, on the internet, there are always the trolls.
Yeah.
And so I've actually started screenshotting the crazy comments. Like, I'm going to do something with them someday. But they're like, oh, well, she succeeded in creating another narcissist in you. Look at how you talk about her, how you treat her. What else? This is so, I know I did a response comment to this, but like, this is so disrespectful to the dead, or how dare you talk about your mother this way?
Oh, man.
And you just throw around the word narcissist. You don't even know what it means. Why do you stop blaming people and go do the work? And I'm like, you saw a 45-second clip about one aspect of my life, and you're just going to assume that I haven't done any work, or that I never tried to see the good in her, or like, it's just very interesting how people have these very self-important perspectives that they have no problem putting out into the world, even though they have no idea about anything.
Yep.
Yes. And you had posted recently something about your mother's funeral, and that you had made the decision you were not going to speak at her funeral. And I was kind of following your stories and reading your posts around that, and people, some people didn't like that.
It matters what they think.
Yeah. And I always am tempted to respond, and I'm just like, it's just really not worth it. Like, but I think, one, because it's so long and so complicated, and I'm like, I'm not typing this out on my phone. Like, we're not doing this. You don't get, if you want to know my story, you can buy my book.
Is the book finished?
Can we buy it? Is it available in stores?
Not yet. It's in the editing phases.
Wonderful.
So,
okay.
Yeah, but people don't like it. And then so on my page, it's for the most part good responses and people who can relate. But I had a friend, we'd lost touch, but she saw me repost it on an account that she followed. And the person who posted was like, hey, mamas, what do you think? Did she respond well? And most of the people said yes, but then sprinkled in, people were like going off. She is so disrespectful and rude. She sounds bitter. She, like all these things. I'm like, whoa, now I know not that I'm a celebrity by any means, but why you always hear the celebrities say like, don't read the comments. I'm like, this is not
don't read the comments. But
yeah,
let's say you were bitter. So
good point.
Like, maybe I have a reason to be upset about the way that I was treated as a child.
A good point.
And I think that is also part of the healing process, is that for kids who grew up with narcissistic parents, that's a hard word, by the way, and being denied your feelings and being told, like, having your feelings minimized, then as an adult to maybe feel angry about that can, I think, be part of the healing process.
You know what? That is exactly right. And I'm going to let you know right now, I think I'm going to make that into a carousel post.
Go for it.
Like, you got to feel,
sometimes you have to be like, yeah, you know what? Actually, I am mad about that. And that does piss me off, and heal through that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not an expert either, but.
Well,
I mean, I think that's healthy.
Well, yeah, and another thing we talk about often, and it doesn't fix you and it doesn't heal you, but like the importance of feeling your feelings, like having to hold things in and having your feelings be invalidated, and finding safe spaces to share your feelings, like it's an important part of like the human experience. And in your formative years, you didn't have that at all. So it seems to serve that you might feel those feelings bigger, more loudly as a result. I mean, who knows? Like, whatever you do you. And like, that's what people need to just like step off about it. But what struck me as you guys were going back and forth there, and the idea of, oh, you only have one mom and it's just your mom. I have to wonder, because I don't think there's anyone who doesn't hold some sort of less than perfect feelings or memories about their mother, no matter how good their relationship is or was or what have you. I think it makes people uncomfortable because while they might not have had an experience that is as, again, obviously problematic as yours, they've probably had to fight through some of those feelings with those kinds of comments to themselves. Do you know what I mean?
Definitely.
Like, and it makes them uncomfortable to maybe see a little bit of their own experience in the things that you're sharing.
Right.
Yeah.
Even if it's not like full on narcissism or whatever. I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah. And I know that everyone is not in this like healing space and cycle breaking space. Like there are some people, unfortunately, who are still, you know, continuing the cycle or maybe even starting their own harmful cycles due to poor choices. But the way my social media feed is curated and the people that I like to keep around me, we're all moving forward and like trying to cycle break and, you know, figure out how do we communicate with our children from a very young age, and just being of the belief that it's normal and healthy to apologize to your children when you're right. Like if you yell at them out of frustration, to come back and say, you know what, mommy should not have yelled. That was not nice. I'm sorry. I was frustrated. And to have those kinds of conversations. And so I hope that that group of people, that movement will continue to grow. And with that, that there will be more comfort in seeing mothers as whole people, because moms will not be trying to, we won't be trying to portray ourselves as the TV moms, like where it's like, no, if I'm going to cry, I have to go lock myself in my room. My children can't know I cry. My children can't know that I get tired.
Or that I'm in pain, Tisha.
Right. I don't know what's going on, Tisha, but let it out.
Well, she when she was dealing with her surgery after her cancer treatment, she was really worried about not being able to do things for her kids.
Yeah.
It was because I had really fallen into that trap of thinking that I had to be everything. I had to be that perfect mom. And then, so I was having surgery I had cervical cancer. I was having surgery to remove that. And one of my biggest fears was that my children were going to see me weak, that they were going to see me in pain, that they were going to see me unable to do the things that I normally could do, that I wasn't going to be able to like walk up the stairs and tuck them into bed, that I wasn't going to be able to like brush their hair and get them ready for school and all of that. Like I was just so worried about them seeing me unwell.
Yeah.
Because I've done a lot of unpacking since then, but I definitely had fallen into that trap of like, I had to present myself as the perfect parent at all times. And it really, I think it did me a lot of disservice, and it probably did them a lot of disservice too, because, you know, I've kind of learned through that it's okay to kind of show my emotions, that I don't, as you said, have to lock myself in the bathroom and cry, that I can just cry and be like, mommy is sad because blah, 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 because we have to sort of show our children that full range of emotions. I think if we want them to grow up and be able to express those emotions themselves. So that's where I'm at with that anyways.
But it's just,
we're all growing.
Well, I live in a space where I am unable to like have a poker face and hide my things. So it's just like, that's just a natural, I think, part of my parenting style. So but yeah, I think we have to break away from that idea of perfection. Like our kids seeing us as perfect. I don't know. I always rebelled against my mom's ideals of perfection. Like I'd go to school, my like girl school, without brushing my teeth in my pajamas, and she'd be screaming at me out the door. And I'm like, whatever, mom, there's no boys. And
no one cares.
Because when you're 16, that's all that matters, is if there's boys or not.
Of
But I think it's important. And I was thinking actually as you were talking, Tisha, and I was wondering for you, Nikieta, because you guys are both in this like cycle breaking mode of you from your own past traumas, and Tisha, it kind of led you to this need to be perfect as a mother, like to like so overcompensate. Nikieta, do you feel that way as a mom, or did you, or had you done more
Yes.
unpack? Okay.
Yes, and I'm so passionate because I've been trying to write an article for a publication about this and no one will pick up my pitch. And I'm like, this is a great pitch. And I don't know why nobody's seeing it, but I think like it's the
Anybody who works
overcompensating.
for a publication that is listening to this,
Hello, come on,
Nikita's
pick it up.
contact
Whoa.
info will be in the show notes.
But I do think that's a very real thing. That
Yeah, you like overcompensate, but like
Mhm.
I was so afraid. So, you know, when your child goes from like being a baby and you go from just keeping them alive to like, oh snap, now I have to start like disciplining and molding you and like correcting you so you don't become a monster.
Mhm.
So in there, and like being afraid of being too stern or
Mhm.
not listening to his every feeling, again because my feelings weren't validated. So it's like, let's talk about it. Why are you doing this? Why are you da da da? And I think, yes, that is good, but also this is an 18-month-old.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was just gonna say,
Like
there too.
sometimes it's not that deep. And so my husband was like, you just need to let him know who's boss in this instance. Like, okay, you've listened to him. This is going on too long. And so like one time I, was stern and cut it off and things like that. But then I was almost in tears talking to my husband, like, he's not going to want to come to me with his feelings because I have invalidated him and shut him down. And, meanwhile, he's on my lap eating an apple. And my husband's like, he doesn't look traumatized.
He's so upset by what you just did to him.
Yeah. And also, and maybe in that moment, you'd also shown him what it means to set a boundary.
Yeah, which we're still working on. I've grown a lot since then. I'm sure as I enter every phase, there will be a new version that kind of rears its head
Yes.
within me of like, have I gone too far or, whatever. But I do think the difference is there's so much more love showered into him and so much more communication in other areas. And like, I'm willing if afterwards he wants to come back and talk about, how things went down. Like, yes, let's have that conversation. I'm not going to shut you down and say like, well, you just do what I say.
Right.
Unless of course it's a safety issue. Then it's like, yes, you need to listen to me because I know how to keep you alive.
Yeah.
But
that is my number one job.
And I tell him that. He knows that if I say, what is mommy's number one job? He's like, to keep me safe. Bingo. Anyway, yeah, there's the overcompensating and the projecting. That's the word I was looking for. Like I project my own trauma onto him, that like anytime I am stern or correct or just tell him he needs to fall in line, like if it is a safety issue or something like that, then I have this fear that he's going to grow up feeling invalidated by me and like he can't be his authentic self.
Yeah, and that's the projecting, because that's how you felt. But the difference is, I think, I mean, I'm not you, so I hope you don't feel like I'm putting words in your mouth.
No,
but
I
I
mean,
think the
you've got it
difference is
totally
that
right.
was happening to you all of the time.
Yeah.
It wasn't the infrequent, I'm setting this really firm boundary and I'm being really stern right now because it's my job to keep you safe, which happens less frequently and is sprinkled in there with also validating his feelings and talking to him the other times.
And showering
That's
him with
kind of
love in a way
right,
that you
and
never were.
Right.
That's kind of where the difference lies, I think.
Yeah. And I watch him. He's so spoiled in a good way. Like, I don't think it's bad. He's not necessarily he's a little entitled. I'll work on that. He's 3, but,
Lots of time.
I think they're entitled at 3 anyway.
Yeah. And I think, it just amazes me and warms my heart how he feels like he has so much free access to me. Like he'll just come and plop on me, or if I'm doing something, he'll just wrap around my leg, or where I literally, it almost felt like entering my mom's presence. It was like requesting to get audience with the king or something like that. Like, may I enter?
Wow.
But him, he's just like, mommy, well, you see, like, I'm clearly here. Told him that I was in a podcast. Mommy, you didn't give me my chicken wing. Mommy, I want to say goodnight. Can I have a kiss? So you guys heard him. He was like, now hug. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
But that's really reassuring. Those things like that. Just whenever I doubt, I just watch how he interacts with me, and I'm like, this is already so different.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably really good advice actually for anybody as a parent who is questioning the choices that they make. Like, watch for how your child's interacting with you, right? Because there's a lot of, I think, people who, like yourself, have those moments where you're doubting if you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, it might not work for preteens or teenagers always, because sometimes
maybe
they,
not.
like,
their brains are like melting down and reforming, and there's nothing rational.
What's going on with them?
There's nothing rational there.
Yeah, so I don't want any like teen parents listening to this and being like, my child hasn't come out of their room all weekend. They just keep listening to Billie Eilish. It's like, okay, that's not you, mom.
Yeah.
If someone is listening to you talk and listening to you talk here about your mom and is like, I think I had a narcissistic parent, what should they do to like either heal their own wounds or to figure out if maybe this was in fact like where they're coming from, or do you have any advice?
Yeah, I would say do a lot of research. Do a Google search. There's lots of helpful articles. Do a YouTube search. There's lots of helpful videos. Allow yourself to go down the rabbit hole, because there's just so much information. And I think even if someone is not professionally diagnosed, you know how you were treated.
Right.
And so whether they're clinically a narcissist or not, it is still not healthy for them to be gaslighting you. It is still not healthy for them to be manipulating you. And so if they have some of these traits, which I believe narcissism is a spectrum, so it's possible to have these traits. It's good for you to know what you're up against so you can know how to guard yourself. And then I'll just revisit, what I said earlier, that if you think that this is the case, it's probably in your best interest to start practicing engaging less, like just disengage. Because again, you cannot beat them at their game, which if you're in a place that you're doing this research, you probably already know that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're always wrong. No matter what, you're always wrong. You're the wrong one. You're the crazy one.
Right. Yes. You're the one who's overreacting. You're the one who's right.
Definitely. And then
misremembering things, or
now you're even the mean one. How could you think that about them? How could you even form your mouth to say that to them? How harsh, how inconsiderate, how ungrateful. Oh my gosh. Now my feeling after all I've done for you, and this is how you want to talk to me? I cannot believe it. You know what? If this is how you feel about me, maybe you should just go.
Yeah. That's the types of things that they say, right? The manipulation.
Yeah, like now all of a sudden you're apologizing. Like it started out with you expressing that your feelings are hurt, and by the end of it, you're apologizing.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
There you go. You just basically summed up narcissism.
There you go.
Awesome.
If there's one thing you think that our listeners should take away from your story, what would it be?
I would say that joy is possible. When you come from a place of childhood trauma, or even if you're currently in a narcissistic relationship, whether it's with a parent or a spouse or a significant other, joy can seem very, very far, but it is out there. It is waiting for you, but you have to be willing to make change to create it. It's not just going to stumble. You're not going to stumble across it one day. Like there's no magic secret. You have to learn how to set boundaries and speak up for yourself. And it happens little by little over time. And before you know it, you will wake up and see that with all of those little decisions, you have created a life of joy, but you have to decide where you're going to start.
Oh, I love it.
That's so good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nikeita, for taking the time to talk to us tonight.
I had a great time. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks for listening to Now What? If you've enjoyed this episode, leave us a review. Your ratings and reviews help more people like you find our podcast.
Don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with someone you think would love it. Until next time, remember, your hard times are the chance to write another chapter.